Tears streamed down Beatrice Hansen's face as she clutched the telegram to her chest. The news of her husband's death crushing her world into dust like the parched earth beneath her boots. Standing on the porch of her small homestead outside Wichita, Kansas, in the summer of 1875, she stared out at the endless plains and felt just as barren inside. The doctor's words from last spring echoed in her mind. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hansen, but you'll never be able to bear children." The scarlet fever that had nearly taken her life had stolen that dream forever. Now, with Daniel gone, killed in a mining accident in Colorado, she had truly lost everything. Beatrice wiped her tears with trembling fingers. At 26, she was a childless widow with nothing but a struggling homestead and memories to keep her company. The small farm Daniel had built with such hope was now hers alone to tend, and the burden felt impossible. She had 30 days to make the mortgage payment, or the bank would claim it all. As the Kansas sun beat down mercilessly, Beatrice forced herself to move. The animals needed tending, and grief was a luxury she couldn't afford. The chickens clucked around her feet as she scattered feed, her movements mechanical, her mind elsewhere. "You need help, Mrs. Hansen." Sheriff Mills stood at her gate 3 days later, his weathered face creased with concern. "Running this place alone isn't possible, not for anyone." Beatrice straightened her spine. "I have no choice. You could sell," he suggested gently. "Move into town, perhaps work at the general store." "Mrs. Patterson was saying this land was my husband's dream," Beatrice interrupted, her voice sharp despite her exhaustion. "I won't abandon it." The sheriff sighed, removing his hat. "Then you need to hire help, and quickly. The bank won't wait, and neither will the seasons." That evening, Beatrice counted the meager savings hidden in the tin box beneath her bed. There wasn't enough for both the mortgage and a hired hand, not for more than a few weeks. Still, Sheriff Mills was right. She needed help to save her home. The next morning, she pinned her honey-brown hair into a tight bun, donned her best dress, faded though it was, and drove the wagon into Wichita. The town had grown considerably in the 3 years since she and Daniel had settled nearby. The cattle drives had brought prosperity, turning the once small settlement into a bustling hub of commerce. Beatrice tied her horse outside the drover's mercantile and smoothed her skirts. She'd place an advertisement for help on the community board, and then see about selling some of her preserves to Mrs. Patterson. Her stomach knotted at the thought of a stranger on their land, in their home, but desperation left her no choice. The mercantile bustled with activity. Cowboys fresh from the trail mingled with town folk, the air thick with the smell of tobacco, coffee, and sweat. Beatrice kept her eyes down, moving purposefully toward the bulletin board. She was so focused on her destination that she didn't see the man until she collided with his broad chest. Strong hands steadied her shoulders as she stumbled backward. "My apologies, madam," a deep voice drawled. Beatrice looked up into the bluest eyes she'd ever seen, set in a sun-bronzed face beneath a battered hat. The man stood well over 6 feet tall, his frame lean but powerful beneath a dusty denim shirt and worn leather vest. "Entirely my fault," she murmured, stepping away from his touch. "I wasn't watching my path." The cowboy smiled, revealing straight white teeth against his tanned skin. "No harm done." He tipped his hat and would have moved on, but his gaze caught on the paper in her hand. "You looking to post something?" Beatrice nodded, suddenly self-conscious. "Yes, I need to hire help for my farm." "What kind of help?" he asked, his interest seemingly genuine. "Someone who knows livestock and crops," she replied. "My husband." Her voice faltered. "I'm managing alone now." Understanding filled his eyes. "I'm sorry for your loss, madam." "Thank you, Mr. Erikson, Yates Erikson." He extended his hand. Recently separated from my outfit and looking for work. Beatrice hesitated before accepting his handshake. His grip was firm but gentle, his palm calloused from years of rope and reins. Beatrice Hansen. My place is small, Mr. Erikson. I can't offer much in wages. I'm not particular about pay, he said. Room, board, and fair treatment is all I ask. Been on the trail too long, and I'm tired of sleeping under stars every night, fine as they are. Suspicion narrowed Beatrice's eyes. Why would a cowboy settle for farm work? The cattle drives pay better. Yates removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. Let's just say I've had my fill of driving longhorns and taking orders from trail bosses who care more about their cattle than their men. There was something in his eyes that spoke of weariness beyond physical exhaustion. Beatrice recognized it because she saw the same look in her mirror each morning, the gaze of someone who had lost something precious. My farm is 10 miles northeast, she said finally. The work is hard, the hours long, and as I said, the pay modest. You'd have the loft in the barn for quarters. Yates settled his hat back on his head. When would you like me to start? His eagerness gave her pause. Don't you want to know more about the job, the terms? I know enough, he replied simply. I know you're in need, and I'm in need of somewhere to be useful. The rest we can figure as we go. Something about his directness eased her anxiety. After years of cattle drives, farm work would likely be familiar to him. And there was an honest quality to his gaze that compelled her to trust him, despite her wariness of strangers. Very well, Mr. Erikson. If you're certain, you can follow me back today. Yates nodded. I'll fetch my horse. And it's just Yates, Mrs. Hansen. Beatrice, she corrected automatically. If we're to work together. An hour later they rode out of town, Yates following her wagon on a handsome chestnut gelding. Beatrice kept her eyes fixed ahead, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake inviting this stranger into her life. Yet what choice did she have? The crops wouldn't harvest themselves, and the livestock needed tending. Without help, she would lose everything. The homestead came into view as they crested a small rise, a modest cabin with a barn and corral, surrounded by fields of wheat shimmering gold in the afternoon sun. A few cattle grazed in the distance, alongside a small herd of sheep. It wasn't grand, but it had been home. It's a fine place, Yates commented as they approached. Good land. Beatrice nodded, throat tight. My husband chose well. She pulled the wagon to a stop before the house. You can stable your horse in the barn. I'll show you where you'll sleep. The barn was cool after the summer heat, smelling of hay and livestock. Beatrice pointed to the ladder leading to the hayloft. It's clean up there. I'll bring you some blankets. Yates took in the space with an appraising eye. This will do fine. Better than most places I've laid my head. The privy is out back, she continued, all business. Meals at 6 noon and 6 again. Sundays we rest except for necessary chores. Yes, madam, he replied, a hint of amusement in his voice. Beatrice frowned. Is something funny, Mr. Erikson? Just Yates, remember. And no, nothing funny. Just appreciating your straightforwardness. This arrangement is for work only, she said firmly. I'll expect you to respect appropriate boundaries. His expression sobered. You have my word as a gentleman, Beatrice. I'm here to work, nothing more. The sincerity in his voice reassured her. Good. I'll see to those blankets then. Supper in an hour. As she walked back to the house, Beatrice felt his eyes on her back. For the first time in weeks, something besides grief and fear stirred inside her, something that felt dangerously like hope. The next morning dawned clear and hot, typical for late July in Kansas. Beatrice had been up since 5, stoking the cook stove and preparing a hearty breakfast. When Yates appeared at the kitchen door promptly at 6, she was momentarily struck by how he filled the doorframe. "Morning," he said, hat in hand. "Something smells mighty fine." "Biscuits, gravy, and eggs," she replied, gesturing to the table. "Coffee's hot." Yates washed his hands at the basin by the door before sitting down. His movements were deliberate, as though he was careful not to take up too much space in her kitchen. Beatrice served him a generous portion, then took her own seat across the table. They ate in silence for several minutes before Beatrice spoke. "We need to repair the fence in the north pasture today. Then there's the wheat to consider. It's ready for harvest, but I can't manage it alone." Yates nodded. "I noticed. We should start on that tomorrow before we lose any to weather. For today, I'll fix the fence and tend to that windmill. I heard it squeaking something fierce." Beatrice blinked in surprise. He'd been paying attention then. "Yes, it needs oiling badly. My husband—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "Daniel took care of such things," she finished quietly. Yates's expression remained neutral, but his eyes softened. "Well, now I will. Just point me to the tools." After breakfast, Beatrice showed him the tool shed, then left him to his work while she collected eggs and tended her vegetable garden. From a distance, she watched him move with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to physical labor. By midday, he'd repaired half the fence line and was working on the windmill, his shirt darkened with sweat in the summer heat. Beatrice called him in for the noon meal: cold ham, bread, and pickled vegetables. As they ate, she found herself studying him more openly. Despite his size, there was nothing threatening about Yates Erikson. His movements were measured, his manner respectful. "How long were you with the cattle drives?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Going on 8 years," he replied. "Started when I was 19, fresh from my parents' farm in Missouri." "You're from farm stock then," he nodded. "Born and raised until restlessness took me west with the herds. Drove cattle from Texas to Kansas City more times than I can count. And now you're content to return to farming." She couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. Yates set down his cup. "I'm content to stop running, Beatrice. The trail has its excitements, but it's a young man's game, and it gets lonely." He met her eyes directly. Everyone needs somewhere to belong eventually. The honesty in his words struck her. Wasn't that what she and Daniel had been seeking when they claimed this land? A place to belong, to build something that would last. "Well," she said, rising to clear the dishes, "we've plenty of work to keep you from getting restless for a while." A small smile played at his lips. "That we do." The days fell into a pattern. Yates would appear at the kitchen door each morning. They would discuss the day's tasks over breakfast, then part ways until the noon meal. He worked tirelessly, tackling each job with methodical efficiency. By the end of the first week, the fence was mended, the windmill running smoothly, and they'd begun harvesting the wheat. Beatrice found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, the way his hands handled tools with surprising gentleness. How he spoke softly to the animals, the quiet competence he brought to every task. He rarely spoke of his past, though occasionally he'd share stories of the trail over supper, his deep voice painting vivid pictures of life on the cattle drives. At night, after he'd returned to the barn, Beatrice would sit on the porch, looking out at the land that suddenly seemed less overwhelming with Yates's help. She still grieved for Daniel, still felt the empty ache of childlessness in her chest, but for the first time since receiving that terrible telegram, she could imagine a future. The wheat harvest consumed them for days. Working side by side under the relentless Kansas sun, they fell into a comfortable rhythm. Yates would cut while Beatrice bound the sheaves, their bodies moving in unconscious synchronicity. "You're good at this," he commented one afternoon, pausing to wipe his brow. "Most city folk wouldn't take to farm life so naturally." Beatrice secured another bundle before responding. I wasn't always a farmer's wife. I grew up in St. Louis, but my father believed in practical education. He made sure I could work with my hands as well as read books. A wise man, Yates observed. Is that where you met your husband? Beatrice nodded, memories washing over her. Daniel was working as a clerk in my father's shipping office. He had dreams of owning land, building something from nothing. She gestured at the fields around them. This was his vision. He chose well, Yates said quietly, in the land and in his wife. Their eyes met briefly before Beatrice looked away, unsettled by the warmth his words kindled. We should finish this section before sundown, she said, returning to her work. That night, as Beatrice prepared for bed, she heard the soft notes of a harmonica drifting from the barn. The melody was haunting, somehow capturing the vastness of the prairie and the depth of loneliness that came with it. She stood by her window, listening until the music finally faded and the night fell silent once more. The mortgage payment came due at the end of August. With the wheat harvested and a portion sold in town, Beatrice had enough to meet her obligation and retain Yates's services for another month. She returned from the bank with lighter shoulders, hope blooming cautiously in her heart. As September arrived, bringing slightly cooler days, Yates suggested they repair the roof before winter set in. There's a weak spot above the kitchen, he explained over breakfast. Won't hold against heavy snow. Beatrice frowned. Are you certain? Daniel never mentioned it. It's recent damage, probably from that storm last month. I can show you. Later that morning, Yates helped her climb onto the low, sloping roof. Sure enough, several shingles had worked loose and water damage was evident in the boards beneath. You've good eyes, she acknowledged. I never would have noticed until it was leaking on my stove. Yates smiled, the expression transforming his usually solemn face. Comes from years of looking for strays on the horizon. You learn to spot trouble before it finds you. They spent the day replacing shingles and reinforcing weak spots. Working together in the close quarters of the roof, Beatrice became acutely aware of Yates's physical presence, the controlled strength in his movements, the clean scent of soap and sunshine that clung to him. When his hand accidentally brushed hers as they reached for the same tool, a jolt of awareness shot through her. She jerked back as though burned, nearly losing her balance on the roof's edge. Yates's hand shot out, steadying her. Careful, he warned, his grip firm on her arm. Don't need you falling and breaking something. I'm fine, she said quickly, pulling away. Just lost my footing. His eyes studied her face for a moment longer than necessary before he nodded and returned to his work. The rest of the afternoon passed in awkward silence, Beatrice keeping a careful distance between them. That evening, as she prepared supper, Beatrice chastised herself for her reaction. Yates had been nothing but respectful since his arrival. The flutter in her chest when their hands touched was her problem, not his unnatural response, perhaps, to the first man who'd shown her kindness since Daniel's death. Still, she needed to be careful. Yates was her employee, nothing more. The last thing she needed was to develop inappropriate feelings for a drifter who would likely move on once winter came. Stew smells good, Yates commented when he entered for supper, his hair damp from washing up at the pump outside. My mother's recipe, Beatrice replied, ladling the thick mixture into bowls. Wild onions make all the difference. They ate in companionable silence, the earlier awkwardness fading. After the meal, Yates lingered at the table, something clearly on his mind. Is something troubling you? Beatrice finally asked. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small carved wooden horse, no bigger than his palm. Made this last night, he explained, setting it on the table. Thought you might like it for the mantel. Beatrice picked up the carving, running her fingers over the smooth lines. It was expertly done, each detail rendered with care from the flowing mane to the powerful haunches. "You made this?" she asked, surprised. "It's beautiful." A hint of color touched his cheekbones. "Whittling passes the time on the trail. Never had much use for the things I carved, but—" "Thank you," she said softly, genuinely touched. "I'll treasure it." Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted between them, a recognition, perhaps, that they were no longer merely employer and employee, but something more complicated. Yates cleared his throat and stood. "Better turn in. Early start tomorrow if we're to finish that roof." Beatrice nodded, still holding the carving. "Good night, Yates." "Good night, Beatrice." After he left, she placed the wooden horse on the mantel beside Daniel's pocket watch. The two objects, one from her past, one from her uncertain present, seemed to stare at her accusingly. Guilt twisted in her stomach, though she'd done nothing wrong. Daniel was gone and she was alone, trying desperately to hold onto the life they'd built. Yet even as she thought it, she knew it wasn't entirely true anymore. She wasn't alone. Yates was there, solid and dependable, bringing life back to the farm bit by bit. The question that haunted her as she prepared for bed was whether his presence was temporary or if he, too, was looking for somewhere to belong. October brought the first frost, silvering the prairie grass and painting the few trees around the homestead in brilliant red and gold. The days grew shorter, the work changing with the season. They repaired the chicken coop, stocked firewood, and prepared the root cellar for winter storage. One crisp morning, Beatrice found Yates examining the small apple orchard behind the house, frowning at the trees laden with fruit. "Something wrong?" she asked, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "These need harvesting before the next hard frost," he replied. "Should have done it last week." Beatrice nodded. "I know. Daniel always handled the orchard. I'm not much for climbing." Yates glanced at her, then back at the trees. "No need for climbing. I'll show you a trick I learned as a boy." He disappeared into the barn, returning with a long pole that had a small basket attached to one end, the rim lined with fabric. "My mother called it an apple picker," he explained, extending the pole to trap an apple in the basket and twist it free from its stem. "Clever," Beatrice commented, genuinely impressed. "I'll make you another so we can work together," he offered. "We'll have these trees cleared by sundown." True to his word, they spent the day harvesting apples, working in companionable conversation. Yates shared stories of his childhood on the Missouri farm, speaking fondly of his parents and 3 younger sisters. "You ever write to them?" Beatrice asked, sorting apples into baskets, perfect ones for storing, bruised ones for immediate cooking. "When I can," he admitted. "Not often enough. My father passed 4 years back, and my sisters are all married with families of their own now. And your mother, still keeping the farm running with my youngest sister and her husband." A shadow crossed his face. "She never approved of my leaving to join the cattle drives. Said a man should put down roots, not follow herds." Beatrice considered this. "And what do you think?" He was quiet for a long moment, focusing on retrieving a particularly stubborn apple. "I think she was right," he finally said. "Took me too many years to admit it, though." The honesty in his voice touched something in Beatrice. "It's never too late to start over," she said softly. "Daniel used to say that." Yates lowered the pole, his blue eyes serious as they met hers. "Your husband sounds like he was a wise man." "He was," she agreed, her throat tightening. "He deserved better than to die alone in a mining accident." "Is that what happened?" Beatrice nodded, the familiar pain washing over her. "He went to Colorado to earn extra money when last year's crops failed. There was a cave-in." Yates set down his tool and moved closer, though he kept a respectful distance. "I'm sorry, Beatrice, truly." Something in his gentle tone broke through her careful composure. "The worst part," she whispered, "is that I'll never have anything of him to hold on to. We wanted children so badly, but—" She swallowed hard. "The fever took that from me before it took him." The admission hung in the air between them, the first time she'd spoken the words aloud since the doctor had delivered his grim verdict. Tears she'd been holding back for months spilled down her cheeks as she confessed her deepest sorrow to this man who had become, somehow, her confidant. "I weep for a child I'll never hold," she said, her voice breaking. "For the family we dreamed of building here, for all the empty years ahead." Yates moved then, closing the distance between them. His arms enfolded her gently, offering comfort without demand. "Then hold me instead," he murmured against her hair. "Not as a replacement for what you've lost, but as someone who cares, who sees your pain." Beatrice should have pulled away, maintained the proper distance between them. Instead, she found herself clinging to his solid warmth, allowing herself to be held for the first time since Daniel's death. Yates made no move beyond that simple embrace, offered no false promises or empty platitudes. He simply held her while she wept, his strength a balm to her raw soul. When her tears finally subsided, Beatrice stepped back, embarrassed by her breakdown. "I apologize," she said, wiping her face. "That was inappropriate." "There's no shame in grief," Yates replied quietly. "Or in accepting comfort." She looked up at him, seeing not pity in his eyes but understanding and something deeper that made her heart beat faster. "Thank you," she said simply. They returned to their work, the moment of intimacy passing but not forgotten. That evening, as they sorted the last of the apples on the porch, Beatrice found herself studying Yates's profile in the fading light, wondering how this stranger had so quickly become essential to her world. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Sheriff Mills rode up with two other men, their expressions grim. "Morning, Mrs. Hansen," the sheriff called, dismounting. "Need a word with your hired hand." Beatrice wiped flour from her hands, stepping onto the porch. "Is something wrong?" Before Mills could answer, one of the other men spoke. "That's him all right, that's Erikson." Yates emerged from the barn, his face impassive as he approached. "Sheriff," he acknowledged with a nod. "Gentlemen." "Mr. Erikson," Mills replied formally. "These men have some questions about a situation that occurred during the last cattle drive you worked." The taller of the two strangers stepped forward, his hand hovering near his holstered gun. "No questions needed, Sheriff. This man shot my brother in cold blood outside Dodge City 3 months ago." Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face. "That can't be right," she protested, looking to Yates. "Tell them it's a mistake." Yates's expression remained calm, though his eyes had hardened. "It wasn't cold blood, Simmons, and you know it. Your brother drew on me first after cheating at cards and threatening the saloon girl." "Liar," Simmons spat. "Jim was no cheat." "Enough," Sheriff Mills interjected. "Mr. Erikson, I need you to come with us to Wichita. There's been a warrant issued from Dodge City." Beatrice stepped between them. "You can't take him. The harvest isn't finished and winter's coming. I need him here." "This isn't about your farm, Mrs. Hansen," Mills said gently. "This is a matter of law." Yates placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "It's all right, Beatrice. I'll go with them and sort this out. But you'll come back." The question slipped out before she could stop it, revealing too much of her feelings. Something flickered in his eyes, regret, perhaps, or longing. "If I can," he promised quietly. The sheriff handcuffed him, though Yates offered no resistance. As they led him to a horse, he looked back at Beatrice. "The north field still needs clearing. Don't try it alone, ask the Wilsons for help." Even facing arrest, he was thinking of her welfare. Beatrice watched them ride away, her heart pounding with fear and confusion. The man she'd grown to trust, perhaps even to love, stood accused of murder. Yet somehow she couldn't believe he was capable of such violence without cause. That night, alone in the quiet house, Beatrice made her decision. At first light, she hitched up the wagon and drove to the Wilson farm 5 miles west. Jacob Wilson, a kindly older man who'd been Daniel's friend, listened gravely to her situation. "I'll send my boys over to help with the field," he promised. "But Beatrice, if this man's wanted for killing—" "He said it was self-defense," she insisted. "I believe him." Mrs. Wilson exchanged a look with her husband. "You've grown fond of him," she observed gently. Beatrice couldn't deny it. "He's a good man, I know it in my heart." "Then you should go to Wichita," Jacob decided. "Find out what's happening. Martha and I will watch over your place for a few days." With their blessing, Beatrice continued on to town. The journey took most of the day, and darkness was falling when she finally reached Wichita. She took a room at the modest hotel near the sheriff's office, planning to visit Yates in the morning. Sleep eluded her that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Yates being led away in handcuffs, his face stoic but his eyes full of unspoken words. What if he was guilty? What if everything between them had been built on lies? No, she couldn't believe that. In the months he'd worked beside her, she'd come to know Yates Erikson's character. He was steady, honest, gentle with animals, and respectful to her. If he had shot a man, he'd had cause. Morning brought a light rain, unusual for the season. Beatrice dressed carefully in her best dress, faded though it was, and made her way to the sheriff's office. Deputy Parker was manning the desk when she entered. "Mrs. Hansen," he greeted her, looking surprised. "What brings you to town?" "I've come to see Mr. Erikson," she replied firmly. "Is he being held here?" The deputy shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, madam, but Sheriff Mills took the witnesses to the judge's office. They're having a hearing this morning." "What witnesses?" Beatrice demanded. "Where is this hearing?" "Courthouse down the street." "But madam, it's not really proper for a lady to—" Beatrice was already out the door, hurrying through the rain toward the courthouse. Inside, she followed the sound of voices to a small chamber where Sheriff Mills stood with the Simmons brothers and a woman Beatrice didn't recognize. Yates sat on a bench, still handcuffed, while an elderly man in a black coat listened to the taller Simmons recount his version of events. "He gunned Jim down for no reason," Simmons was saying. "My brother never even cleared his holster." "That's not true," the woman beside him spoke up suddenly. "Jim Simmons pulled first, and everyone in the saloon saw it." Beatrice stepped into the room, drawing all eyes to her. "Your Honor," she addressed the judge, guessing his identity from his attire, "I'd like to speak on Mr. Erikson's behalf." The judge peered at her over his spectacles. "And you are Beatrice Hansen. Yates Erikson has been working on my farm for the past 3 months. He's a man of integrity and honest labor." Yates had turned at the sound of her voice, his expression a mixture of surprise and something that looked like hope. "Beatrice," he said softly, "you shouldn't be here." "I disagree," she replied, moving to stand beside him. "Someone needs to ensure the truth is heard." The woman who had contradicted Simmons stepped forward. "I'm Eliza Morton, Your Honor. I was working at the Silver Dollar the night of the shooting. Jim Simmons was drunk and losing badly at poker. He accused Mr. Erikson of cheating, then grabbed me when I brought drinks to the table." She shuddered at the memory. "When Mr. Erikson intervened, Simmons drew his gun. Mr. Erikson was faster, that's all." The judge looked between the witnesses. "Mr. Simmons, do you have anyone besides yourself who saw this alleged cold-blooded killing?" Simmons sputtered. "Everyone in Dodge knows Jim wouldn't draw unless provoked. This man must have done something. Defending a lady's honor isn't provocation for murder," the judge observed dryly. "Sheriff, do you have any other witnesses who contradict Miss Morton's account?" Mills shook his head. "No, Your Honor. The warrant from Dodge City mentioned a shooting, but not the circumstances. That's why I brought everyone here to sort it out." The judge considered for a moment, then nodded. "Based on the testimony presented, I find no evidence that Mr. Erikson acted outside the bounds of self-defense. The charges are dismissed." He banged his gavel decisively. "Sheriff, please remove those handcuffs." Relief flooded through Beatrice as Mills unlocked the restraints. Yates rubbed his wrists, his eyes never leaving her face. "You came all this way," he said, wonder in his voice. "Of course I did," she replied simply. Outside the courthouse, the rain had stopped and weak sunlight broke through the clouds. Eliza Morton approached them, smiling tentatively. "Mr. Erikson, I'm glad I found you. I've been following the cattle drives, looking to clear your name." Yates took her hand gratefully. "I appreciate your courage, Miss Morton. Few would have spoken against the Simmons brothers." "Is there anything we can do to repay you?" Beatrice asked. Eliza shook her head. "Just knowing justice was done is enough. I should get back to Dodge City before I lose my position." After she left, Beatrice and Yates stood in awkward silence, the busy street flowing around them. "You believed in me," he finally said, "even after hearing I'd killed a man." Beatrice met his gaze steadily. "I know your character, Yates Erikson. You wouldn't take a life without cause." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the golden flecks in his blue eyes. "In all my years, I've never had someone stand by me like that, never had someone to come home to." The word home hung between them, heavy with meaning. Beatrice took a deep breath. "Is that what my farm is to you now, home?" "Not the farm," he said softly. "You, Beatrice, wherever you are would be home to me." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Yates." "I know it's too soon," he continued quickly. "You're still grieving and I'm just a hired hand. But these months working beside you, seeing your strength and kindness, I've come to care for you deeply." Beatrice thought of Daniel, of the dreams they'd shared, the future cut short by tragedy. She thought of the emptiness she'd carried since learning she would never bear a child, the loneliness of the months after his death. Then she thought of Yates, his gentle hands as he carved the wooden horse, his steadiness during the harvest, the way he'd held her while she wept. Without him, the farm would survive, but would she truly live? "It is too soon," she agreed, watching his face fall. "But that doesn't mean it isn't real, what's grown between us." Hope kindled in his eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I need time, but I don't want you to leave." She smiled tentatively. "The farm needs you, I need you." Yates reached for her hand, his touch warm and sure. "Then I'll stay for as long as you'll have me. No expectations, no demands. Just two people building something together day by day." "I'd like that," Beatrice whispered. They rode home together, the future stretching before them like the endless Kansas plains, uncertain but full of possibility. The homestead looked different somehow when they returned, as though seeing it through new eyes. Not just Daniel's dream anymore, but something that could become their own. As winter descended on the prairie, Beatrice and Yates settled into a new rhythm. He moved from the barn loft to the small room off the kitchen that had once been intended as a nursery. They worked side by side during the days, and in the evenings, Yates would play his harmonica while Beatrice sewed or read aloud from one of her precious books. Christmas approached, bringing with it a sense of both melancholy and hope. On Christmas Eve, snow fell softly outside the windows as Beatrice prepared a special supper. She'd traded eggs and preserves for a small turkey at the Wilson farm, and the house smelled of cinnamon and pine from the small tree Yates had cut and placed in the corner. "This reminds me of Christmases when I was a girl," she commented as they sat before the fire after their meal. "My father always made sure we had music and greenery, no matter how tight money was that year." Yates smiled, watching the firelight play across her features. Over the past months, color had returned to her cheeks, and she smiled more readily. The grief was still there. He saw it sometimes when she didn't know he was looking, but it no longer defined her. "My mother insisted on new clothes every Christmas," he shared. "Even if she had to stay up nights sewing them herself. Said no child of hers would greet the Christ child in patched trousers." Beatrice laughed softly. "She sounds wonderful." "She is," Yates agreed. "Stubborn as they come, but with a heart as big as Missouri." He hesitated, then added, "I wrote to her about you." Surprise flickered across Beatrice's face. "You did? What did you say?" "That I'd found a place that felt like home with a woman of remarkable courage." He held her gaze steadily. "That I'm happier than I've been in years." Beatrice's cheeks flushed. In the months since his arrest and release, their relationship had evolved slowly, carefully. They'd shared stories, worked together, occasionally touched hands across the supper table, but nothing more. Yates had been true to his word, no expectations, no demands. "I have something for you," she said, rising to retrieve a package from beneath the tree. "It isn't much." Yates unwrapped the brown paper to reveal a fine woolen scarf in deep blue, matching his eyes. "Did you make this?" he asked, running his fingers over the soft material. Beatrice nodded. "I've been working on it in the evenings when you're in the barn. Do you like it?" "It's perfect," he said sincerely, wrapping it around his neck. "Thank you." He reached into his pocket. "I have something for you too." The small wooden box he placed in her hands was itself a work of art, carved with intricate prairie flowers. When she opened it, a melody began to play, the same haunting tune she'd heard from his harmonica that first night. "It's a music box," she breathed. "How did you—" "Jacob Wilson helped with the mechanism," Yates explained. "But I carved the box and set the tune. It's called Prairie Lullaby. My mother used to hum it." Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes as she listened to the delicate notes. "It's the most beautiful gift I've ever received." Yates took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "Beatrice, I know we agreed to take things slowly, and I'll honor that for as long as you need. But I want you to know that my feelings haven't changed. If anything, they've only deepened." She met his gaze, seeing in it all the things he wasn't saying: his devotion, his patience, his love. "Mine too," she whispered. "I thought my heart died with Daniel, but it didn't. It just needed time to heal." Yates lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. "Then we'll continue as we have been, building this life together day by day. No rush, no pressure." But as he lowered her hand, Beatrice made a decision. Leaning forward, she pressed her lips to his in a soft, tentative kiss. Yates remained perfectly still for a moment, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment. Then, with infinite gentleness, he returned the kiss, one hand coming up to cup her cheek. When they parted, Beatrice smiled through her tears. "Merry Christmas, Yates Erikson." "Merry Christmas, Beatrice Hansen," he replied, his voice husky with emotion. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the prairie in pristine white. Inside, the fire crackled and the music box played its sweet melody, as two people who had known profound loss discovered that hearts, like fields, could lie fallow for a season before blooming once more. Spring came early to Kansas in 1876, bringing with it new beginnings. The fields turned green, calves were born, and the apple trees burst into fragrant bloom. Beatrice and Yates worked from sunrise to sunset, planting crops and mending fences weathered by winter storms. In town, people had begun to talk, of course. A widow living with a single man, regardless of separate sleeping quarters, was fodder for gossip. But the Wilsons stood firmly by them, and Sheriff Mills, having seen firsthand the honorable way Yates had handled his arrest, often spoke in their defense. Still, Beatrice felt the sideways glances when they went to church on Sundays, heard the whispers that stopped when she entered the general store. It shouldn't have mattered, she knew the truth of their arrangement, but the judgment stung nonetheless. "We could marry," Yates suggested one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "Not just to silence the gossips, but because I love you, Beatrice. Have since that day in the orchard when you trusted me with your deepest pain." Beatrice's heart fluttered at his words. Over the winter months, their relationship had deepened into something profound. They'd shared countless conversations, gentle touches, and tender kisses, but Yates had never pressed for more, respecting her need for time. "Are you proposing, Mr. Erikson?" she asked, a smile playing at her lips. "I reckon I am, Mrs. Hansen," he replied, taking her hand. "Though I'd planned something more romantic than concern over town gossip." Beatrice laughed softly. "I don't need romance, I just need you, Yates." She squeezed his hand. "Yes, I'll marry you. Not for the town's sake, but for ours." Joy lit his face as he pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left her breathless. When they finally parted, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I'll make you happy, Beatrice, I swear it." "You already do," she whispered. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Wichita. Reverend Thomas officiated, while the Wilsons and Sheriff Mills stood as witnesses. Beatrice wore a new dress of pale blue calico, and Yates donned the only suit he owned, purchased years ago for his father's funeral. "I, Yates Erikson, take thee, Beatrice Hansen, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he vowed, his voice steady and sure. "To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." As Beatrice repeated the same words, she felt Daniel's memory hovering like a gentle benediction. He would have wanted her to find happiness again, to continue the life they'd started on their beloved farm. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Thomas pronounced, "I now declare you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Yates kissed her tenderly before the small gathering, his eyes shining with emotion. "Mrs. Erikson," he murmured against her lips. The name felt strange but right, a symbol of her new beginning while honoring all that had come before. After a modest celebration at the hotel restaurant, they rode home together as husband and wife, the future stretching bright before them. That night, as moonlight spilled through the bedroom window, Beatrice and Yates came together as one for the first time. His touch was reverent, his patience infinite as he helped her rediscover passion after so long without. In his arms, she found not just physical pleasure but a profound connection that healed the last broken pieces of her heart. "I love you," she whispered in the darkness, her head nestled against his chest. "I never thought I'd say those words again to anyone." Yates stroked her hair, his heartbeat strong beneath her ear. "I'll spend my life making sure you never regret it," he promised. The farm flourished under their joint care that year. The wheat grew tall, the livestock healthy, and the apple trees produced a record harvest. With careful management and Yates's skill with the animals, they even managed to put aside a small sum after paying the mortgage and purchasing supplies for winter. In November, as the first cold winds swept across the prairie, Beatrice woke one morning feeling strangely unsettled. She had been unusually tired lately, sometimes nauseated in the mornings, but had attributed it to the hard work of harvest season. Now, counting back in her mind, she realized what she had thought impossible. She said nothing to Yates, afraid to kindle hope only to have it extinguished. Instead, she rode to town alone the next day, ostensibly to purchase supplies but really to visit Dr. Morris. The doctor's examination confirmed what her heart had already begun to suspect. "Congratulations, Mrs. Erikson," he said with a smile. "You're expecting a child due around May, I'd estimate." Beatrice stared at him in disbelief. "But that's not possible. After the fever, I was told." "Medicine isn't an exact science," Dr. Morris explained gently. "What seemed certain then has proven otherwise. You're definitely with child." Joy, unlike anything she'd ever known, bloomed in Beatrice's chest. A child, the dream she'd thought forever denied to her, was now growing within her womb. She rode home in a daze, her hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. Yates was repairing a harness on the porch when she returned, his face lighting up at the sight of her as it always did. He rose to help her down from the wagon, concern creasing his brow when he saw her expression. "Beatrice, what is it? You're pale as a ghost." She took his hands in hers, suddenly unable to find words. Tears filled her eyes, spilling down her cheeks even as a smile trembled on her lips. "You're scaring me," Yates said, pulling her close. "Are you ill?" Beatrice shook her head, drawing back to meet his gaze. "I'm with child, Yates. We're going to have a baby." He stared at her, uncomprehending. "But you said, the doctor told you." "He was wrong," she whispered. "Or perhaps it's a miracle. Either way, it's true. Dr. Morris confirmed it today." Wonder dawned on Yates's face, followed by pure, unrestrained joy. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around as laughter burst from him. "A baby, our baby." When he set her down, his expression grew serious. "Are you all right? Is there any danger?" "Dr. Morris says I'm perfectly healthy," Beatrice assured him. "The baby should arrive in May." Yates dropped to his knees before her, pressing his ear to her abdomen as though he might hear the tiny life within. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "Your mama and papa are waiting for you." The tender moment brought fresh tears to Beatrice's eyes. She ran her fingers through Yates's dark hair, overcome with gratitude for this man who had brought love back into her life, and now, miraculously, the child she'd longed for. "I never thought." She began, her voice breaking. Yates rose to his feet, cradling her face in his calloused hands. "I know," he said softly. "But you're not just holding me now, Beatrice. Soon you'll hold our child too." The words echoed their moment in the orchard, when she'd wept for a child she'd never hold and he'd offered himself instead. Now, impossibly, they would have both each other and the family they'd dreamed of building together. That evening, as snow began to fall outside the windows, they sat before the fire planning for the future. The room that had once been intended as a nursery, and had later become Yates's temporary quarters, would serve its original purpose after all. They would need a cradle, baby clothes, and countless other items that Beatrice had once despaired of ever needing. "I'll write to my mother tomorrow," Yates said, his arm around Beatrice's shoulders. "She'll have advice for us, and probably some of my sister's baby things stored away." Beatrice nodded, already imagining the tiny garments she would sew during the long winter evenings ahead. "We should tell the Wilsons, too. Martha will be beside herself with excitement." Yates chuckled. "The whole county will know within a week." "Let them talk," Beatrice replied contentedly. "This time it will be happy news." As her pregnancy progressed through the winter months, Beatrice bloomed with new life. The sickness of the early weeks faded, replaced by an energy that surprised even her. She continued her duties around the farm, though Yates insisted on taking over the heavier tasks, and often enlisted Jacob Wilson's sons for anything he deemed too strenuous for her. Letters arrived from Missouri, filled with congratulations and practical advice from Yates's mother and sisters. A package followed, containing baby clothes yellowed with age but still serviceable after laundering, along with a beautifully knitted blanket made by his mother's hands. "She wants to visit after the baby comes," Yates told Beatrice one evening as they sorted through the treasures. Says she's waited long enough to meet the woman who finally tamed her wandering son. Beatrice smiled, holding a tiny gown against her growing belly. I'd like that. She raised a good man. I want to thank her. In February, they attended a barn raising for a new family that had settled 10 miles east. Such community gatherings were rare in winter, but necessary before spring planting would consume everyone's time. Beatrice sat with the women, sewing and chatting while the men worked on the frame. "You're positively glowing," Martha Wilson commented, her kind face creased with smile lines. "Motherhood agrees with you even before the little one arrives." Beatrice touched her rounded abdomen, feeling the baby shift within. "I still can't quite believe it's real," she admitted. "After being told it was impossible for so long." "The good Lord works in mysterious ways," Martha replied. "Sometimes he saves the best blessings for when we've stopped looking for them." Across the gathering, Beatrice caught Yates watching her, his face softening with love when their eyes met. He had proved himself not just a skilled farmer but a devoted husband, tender in his affections and steadfast in his support. Each day, she thanked Providence for bringing him to her doorstep when she'd needed him most. The last weeks of winter passed in peaceful anticipation. Yates spent evenings crafting a cradle from cherry wood, carving prairie flowers along its sides to match the music box he'd given Beatrice for Christmas. She sewed tiny garments and prepared the nursery, sometimes pausing in wonder at how dramatically her life had changed in less than a year. Spring arrived with its usual Kansas fickleness, warm days followed by sudden frosts, gentle rains interspersed with violent thunderstorms. By April, the prairie was green once more, and Beatrice's time grew near. Dr. Morris had assured them all was progressing normally, but anxiety mingled with her excitement as her due date approached. "What if something goes wrong?" she asked Yates one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. "What if, Essachiche," he soothed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Dr. Morris says you're healthy as can be, and the baby too. Martha Wilson has delivered half the children in the county, and she'll be right here with us. Everything will be fine." Beatrice nodded, trying to believe it. After so many years thinking motherhood beyond her reach, the fear of losing this miracle at the last moment haunted her dreams. "Besides," Yates continued, his voice gentle, "worrying won't change what's meant to be. All we can do is prepare and pray, and we've done both." His calm confidence steadied her, as it had so many times before. She nestled closer to him, letting his warmth and the strong beat of his heart lull her toward sleep. Whatever came, they would face it together. The baby arrived on a perfect May morning, after a night of labor that tested the limits of Beatrice's endurance. Martha Wilson and Dr. Morris attended her, while Yates paced outside, occasionally allowed in to wipe her brow or offer words of encouragement. As dawn broke over the prairie, their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that brought tears to everyone's eyes. Dr. Morris placed the squirming, red-faced infant on Beatrice's chest, where small fists waved in indignation at this sudden change of circumstance. "She's perfect," Martha pronounced, beaming as she cleaned and wrapped the newborn. 7 pounds if she's an ounce, and a full head of dark hair like her papa." Yates stood transfixed in the doorway, his face a study in awe and adoration. When Martha beckoned him forward, he approached the bed with reverent steps, kneeling beside Beatrice to gaze upon their child. "Hello, my darling," Beatrice whispered to the tiny bundle in her arms, her heart so full it might burst. "We've been waiting for you." Yates reached out with trembling fingers to touch their daughter's velvet cheek. "She's a miracle," he breathed. "Our miracle." Tears spilled down Beatrice's face as she looked from her child to her husband. "Would you like to hold her?" With infinite care, Yates gathered the swaddled infant into his strong arms. The baby quieted immediately, as though recognizing the safety of her father's embrace. "Hey there, little lady," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. "I'm your pa." The sight of this man, once a wandering cowboy with no roots, holding their daughter with such tenderness, completed something in Beatrice's soul that had been broken since that long-ago doctor's verdict. This was what she'd wept for, what she'd thought forever denied to her, not just a child of her own, but a family, a future, a home filled with love. "What shall we name her?" Yates asked, returning the baby to Beatrice's arms. They had discussed names but made no final decision, wanting to meet their child first. Now, looking at the perfect little face, Beatrice knew. "Hope," she said softly. "Hope Elizabeth Erikson." Yates smiled, understanding the significance. "Hope," he repeated. "It's perfect, just like her." After Martha and the doctor departed, promising to return the next day, Beatrice and Yates spent precious hours simply marveling at their daughter. She nursed eagerly, then slept peacefully in the cradle Yates had crafted, the music box playing its gentle lullaby beside her. "Are you happy?" Yates asked that evening, sitting on the edge of the bed where Beatrice rested. She took his hand, overwhelmed by the depth of her feelings. "Beyond words," she whispered. "You gave me back my life, Yates, first by helping me save the farm, then by loving me when I thought love was behind me. And now this greatest gift of all." He shook his head, bringing her hand to his lips. "No, Beatrice, you gave me life. Before you, I was just drifting, never belonging anywhere or to anyone. You gave me a home, a purpose. You made me believe I was worthy of something permanent." Outside their window, the sunset painted the prairie in gold and rose, a fitting end to a day of beginnings. In her cradle, Hope slept the innocent sleep of the newly arrived, unaware of the journey that had brought her parents together or the depth of love that awaited her. As Beatrice drifted toward sleep that night, Yates's strong presence beside her and their daughter's soft breathing filling the room, she remembered those dark days after Daniel's death, when she'd believed her life effectively over. How wrong she had been. Life, like the Kansas prairie, might lie dormant through seasons of hardship, but given time and nurturing, it would bloom again in unexpected glory. She wept for a child she'd never hold. Yates had said that day in the orchard, offering himself in comfort. Now, through some miracle of fate or divine intervention, she held both the man who had healed her heart and the child born of their love. Some dreams, Beatrice realized as sleep claimed her, weren't ended by tragedy but merely waiting for the right season to flourish. And some journeys, though marked by loss and sorrow, led eventually to joys beyond imagining if only one had the courage to keep walking forward, one step at a time. 5 years passed, transforming the modest Hansen homestead into the thriving Erikson farm. The original cabin had been expanded with Yates's skilled hands, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. The barn housed more livestock, the fields yielded bountiful harvests, and the apple orchard produced fruit that won prizes at the county fair. Hope grew into a spirited, dark-haired girl with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined nature. She followed Yates around the farm like a shadow, collecting eggs without breaking them by age 3 and helping with the garden seeds by 4. She loved stories, particularly those about brave cowboys and strong pioneer women, and insisted on riding her own pony by the time she turned 5. "She's the perfect blend of us both," Beatrice remarked one summer evening as they watched Hope chase fireflies in the yard. "Your adventurous spirit, my practicality." Yates chuckled, his arm around his wife's shoulders, and twice the stubbornness of either. Their life together had settled into a comfortable rhythm, hard work balanced by moments of simple joy, challenges overcome through partnership and perseverance. Yates's mother had visited twice, delighting in her granddaughter and approving wholeheartedly of the woman who had finally given her restless son roots. In town, the initial gossip had long since given way to respect. The Eriksons were known for their fair dealings, their generosity in hard times, and their dedication to their community. When the church needed a new roof, Yates organized the men to complete the work. When illness struck the Wilson family, Beatrice was there with food and nursing care. Hope's 5th birthday arrived in May of 1881, celebrated with a picnic attended by neighboring families. As the children played and the adults visited, Beatrice found herself watching her daughter with a familiar ache in her heart, not of sorrow this time, but of overwhelming gratitude. "Penny for your thoughts," Yates said, joining her on the blanket spread beneath the big cottonwood. Beatrice smiled up at him, still handsome at 36, a few strands of silver now threading through his dark hair. "I was just thinking how fortunate we are, how complete." A shadow crossed his face briefly before he smiled. "Yes, we are blessed," but something in his expression gave her pause. "Yates, what is it?" He hesitated, then sat beside her, taking her hand. "I didn't want to say anything until I was sure, but I've noticed you've been tired lately. And sick in the mornings." Beatrice stilled, her free hand instinctively moving to her abdomen. She had noticed the same things but dismissed them as the result of spring planting and perhaps a touch of influenza. "Could it be, you think I might be?" She couldn't finish the sentence, afraid to voice the hope aloud. Yates's eyes were gentle. "It reminded me of when you were carrying Hope, but I didn't want to suggest it if I was wrong." That night, after the guests had departed and Hope was tucked into bed with her beloved rag doll, Beatrice sat with Yates on the porch swing he'd built the previous summer. "If it's true," she said softly, "if we're to have another child." "It would be another miracle," he finished. "One I never dared hope for." Beatrice leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. "When I lost Daniel and learned I couldn't have children, I thought life had nothing left to offer me. I never imagined I could be so completely happy." Yates pressed a kiss to her temple. "Sometimes the best gifts come when we've stopped looking for them." She recognized his words as an echo of Martha Wilson's wisdom from years before. "Like a drifting cowboy who needed somewhere to belong, exactly like that," he chuckled. "Though I think I got the better end of that bargain." 2 days later, Dr. Morris confirmed what they had begun to suspect. Another child would join their family around Christmas, a winter baby to complement their spring daughter. When they told Hope she would be a big sister, her reaction was pure excitement. "Can I teach the baby to ride?" she asked, blue eyes wide with anticipation. "And to gather eggs and feed the chickens." "When the baby's older," Beatrice promised, smoothing her daughter's dark curls. "First, babies need lots of sleep and milk and gentle handling." Hope considered this seriously. "Like the spring lambs." Yates laughed, scooping her onto his shoulders. "Exactly like that, pumpkin, and you'll be the best big sister any baby ever had." As summer faded into fall, Beatrice's body changed with the season, her belly growing round with new life. This pregnancy was different from her first, more tiring, with occasional discomforts that hadn't troubled her when carrying Hope. Dr. Morris assured her all was well, but prescribed more rest than she had needed before. Yates took on extra responsibilities without complaint, handling household tasks that had typically been Beatrice's domain, while still managing the farm work. In the evenings, he would read to Hope while Beatrice rested. Their daughter curled against his side as he brought cowboys and Indians, pioneers and adventurers to life with his deep voice. The bond between father and daughter had been strong from the beginning, but it deepened during these months as Yates shared more of his past with his attentive child. He told her about life on the cattle drives, about sleeping beneath the stars and singing to restless herds. He described the vastness of the prairie before settlements dotted the landscape, the herds of buffalo that had once darkened the horizon. "Were you a real cowboy, Papa?" Hope asked one night, her small face serious in the lamplight. "With guns and everything?" Yates glanced at Beatrice, who nodded encouragingly. They had agreed Hope was old enough to hear simplified versions of their history. "I was," he confirmed. "For many years before I met your mama. I rode with the herds from Texas to Kansas, rain or shine, through dust storms and river crossings." Hope's eyes widened. "Were you ever in danger?" "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I was careful and lucky. Did you ever shoot anyone?" The question was innocent, born of a child's curiosity rather than morbid interest. Yates hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Once. A bad man was going to hurt someone and I had to stop him. But guns aren't for solving problems, Hope. They're tools like axes or hammers and even more dangerous. A good person uses words first always." Hope nodded, absorbing this wisdom. "Is that how you met Mama? Did you save her from bad men?" Beatrice laughed softly from her chair by the fire. "No, darling. I needed help with the farm after your first father went to heaven and your papa came looking for work. He saved the farm, not me. And then you fell in love and had me," Hope concluded, satisfied with this narrative. "That's right," Yates agreed, exchanging a smile with his wife over their daughter's head. The full story was more complicated, of course, but the essentials were their two lonely people finding each other when they needed it most, building something beautiful from the broken pieces of their pasts. December arrived with bitter cold and heavy snows that isolated the farm for days at a time. Beatrice's time drew near, and Yates insisted on having Martha Wilson stay with them in case the baby came during a storm when Dr. Morris couldn't reach them. It was fortunate he did. 3 days before Christmas, Beatrice woke in the night with sharp pains that came in increasingly rapid waves. The snow was falling so heavily that visibility was near zero, making a trip to town impossible. "The baby's coming," she told Yates, gripping his hand as another contraction seized her. "Now." He woke Martha, who took charge with calm efficiency. Hope was moved to the main room where she curled up on the sofa, too excited to sleep despite the late hour. This labor progressed far more quickly than Beatrice's first. Within 4 hours, their son entered the world, smaller than Hope had been but with a lusty cry that belied his size. "Another perfect one," Martha announced, placing the swaddled infant in Beatrice's arms. "A fine boy with his mama's eyes." Yates hovered at the bedside, his expression a mixture of joy and concern. The birth had been faster but harder than Hope's, and Beatrice looked exhausted, her face pale against the pillows. "He's beautiful," she whispered, gazing down at the tiny face. "Come meet your son, Yates." As he had with Hope, Yates approached with reverence, kneeling beside the bed to study the new life they had created together. The baby had a dusting of light brown hair, and when he briefly opened his eyes, they were indeed the same warm brown as Beatrice's. "He's perfect," Yates agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "Just like his mama." Martha cleared her throat. "Someone else is waiting to meet him too," she reminded them, opening the door to reveal Hope standing uncertainly in the hallway, her rag doll clutched to her chest. "Come in, sweetheart," Beatrice called softly. "Come meet your brother." Hope approached the bed cautiously, her eyes huge as she peered at the tiny bundle in her mother's arms. "He's so small," she whispered. "All babies start small," Yates explained, lifting her to sit beside Beatrice on the bed. "You were this size once too." Hope reached out a tentative finger to touch her brother's cheek. "What's his name?" Beatrice and Yates exchanged a look. They had discussed names, but, as with Hope, wanted to meet their child first. Now, looking at this son born in the depths of winter, Beatrice knew. "Daniel," she said softly. "Daniel Yates Erikson." Yates's eyes filled with tears at the gesture, honoring both Beatrice's first husband and their current joy. "It's perfect," he agreed. "A strong name for our son." As Martha tactfully withdrew to prepare tea, the new family of 4 shared their first moments together. Hope, overcome with the importance of her role as big sister, solemnly promised to help care for baby Daniel and teach him everything she knew. "And I'll protect him," she added, her small face serious. "Like Papa protects us." Yates gathered his daughter close with one arm while his other hand rested on his newborn son. "That's right, Pumpkin. Families protect each other always." Outside, the snow continued to fall, wrapping the farmhouse in a blanket of white silence. Inside, the warmth of love and new life held winter's chill at bay. Beatrice, cradling her son while her husband and daughter sat close beside her, felt a sense of completion so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "Happy?" Yates asked softly, noticing her emotion. She nodded, unable to speak for the fullness in her heart. Once, she had wept for a child she believed she would never hold. Now she held not just one miracle, but 2 along with the love of a man who had taught her that grief, like winter, eventually gives way to spring. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she whispered. As if in agreement, baby Daniel sighed in his sleep, one tiny hand escaping his blanket to curl around his father's finger. Hope leaned against her mother's side, her eyes growing heavy despite her determination to keep watch over her new brother. In that perfect moment, the past with all its sorrows seemed to recede, leaving only the present warm, secure, complete. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together. This family forged not by blood alone, but by choice and love and the courage to begin again when all seemed lost. Outside, the stars emerged as the snowfall lessened, their ancient lights shining down on the Erikson farm, one small pocket of warmth and life in the vast Kansas prairie, where a drifting cowboy had found his home and a grieving widow had found new joy, proving that sometimes the end of one dream is merely the beginning of another, even more beautiful than the first.